In 2009, Pandemic Studios released The Saboteur. You played as Sean Devlin, an Irish car mechanic who was working to free Nazi-occupied France alongside many others. It was so good for its time. You see, in my eyes, Pandemic Studios were some of the leaders in open world design in the early 2000s. They brought us the likes of Destroy All Humans, the Mercenaries series, and then they ended it off with The Saboteur before EA had shut them down. Afterwards, Ubisoft stepped in, and in my eyes, plagued open world design because Pandemic laid down the groundwork and Ubisoft never ever evolved beyond it, consistently running with checklists. So it's interesting that here in 2021, we effectively have the sequel to The Saboteur. It's an open world full of pure destruction, tearing down a fascist regime. However, Far Cry 6 is, in every sense of the word, a Ubisoft game. What exactly is that? A Ubisoft game is a checklist objective set open world. It's a revolving door of characters you're given zero reasons to care about throughout the story. It's recycled missions from past games to the point of being masturbatory game design. Yeah, you got your flamethrower mission, just like in Far Cry 3, remember that? There's a mission where you get drunk. There's a hallucinogenic mission. It's like they just see Far Cry 3 and they cannot, for the life of them, get over it. It's like they're scared to go beyond that and find out what happens if we start to really evolve some ideas here. Anything that isn't recycled in this game is borrowed from somewhere else without much iteration. This would all be fine. Some people are looking for just a guilty pleasure open world or something to sink some time in, but my experience of about 25 hours on Xbox Series X was plagued by a plethora of bugs, such as enemies spawning directly on top of me, busted AI just outright not working very often, and quests consistently breaking, halting my progress, and leading to a lot of reloads. What's sad about this is buried beneath this, and despite my own personal gripes with Ubisoft's open world design, I understand how some are attracted to it, and at times I found fun. And so it's a shame that so much got in the way here, but after all these years and consistently playing Ubisoft games, it's getting tiresome. It's time to do something new. I need to get into a lot more detail though, so let's get it started with the story. Far Cry 6 is set on the fictional island of Yara, which is based off of Cuba. It's absolutely beautiful, and this is one place that Ubisoft always nails it in their open worlds. Their environmental artists kill it consistently. Such beautiful games. Yara is no exception, from the shorelines to the dense jungles you can explore, all sorts of caves and caverns and broken down abandoned buildings to cityscapes. There's a lot to see in this game, and as always, it's very visually appealing. You play as Danny Rojas, an orphan and former member of the military who ends up joining the revolution when things get personal. I put personal in quotes because it's one of those situations that Ubisoft always does where they introduce a character to you, you talk to them for about 10 minutes, and they're expecting this profound impact on you that in this case serves as the spark plug for literally everything. Just this one 10-minute window at the start of the game, they're like, this person that you definitely care about, which you don't, is the reason why you're in on this. But what I think is the main draw for people with Far Cry 6 is Anton Castillo, who is acted by Giancarlo Esposito. He sits as the dictator of this island. On the island of Yara, they're currently working on a cure for cancer, and Anton is forcing his people to work on Viviro plantations to produce said cure. So essentially what you have here is a very evil fascist, and they're hoping, they being Ubisoft, that you will have this morally complex villain sitting right in front of you because you have this piece of crap who is creating the cure for cancer. It's an easy thing to understand desiring a cure for, because myself, and I'm sure almost everyone watching this video, has been touched by cancer in one way or another. I understand why on paper Ubisoft thought, hey, this could create a really compelling villain. So why does it fall somewhat short for me? It's a number of things. Number one is, one of the things that Ubisoft kept doing in past Far Cry games that they should have always done was creating a connection between the protagonist and the main villain. Now, you got awkward moments like in Far Cry 5 where you'd be going across the open world, you'd pass out, suddenly Joseph Seed has captured you, he's talking to you, and it's like, dude, you could just kill me right here and end all your problems, and he never does. There is a little bit of ludonarrative dissonance there, but at least you're allowed to establish a connection to the villain. Whereas in Far Cry 6, it's a consistent reaction montage. It's like every time you finish one of the main arcs in this game, you see Anton Castillo reacting to it in some way, but there's no connection established between your character and him. However, Giancarlo's performance is still great, so anytime I did see Anton Castillo, I perked up a little bit. I was excited to see him get to work, and he is ultimately well acted, right? So nothing there has hurt the character, and it's not like Anton Castillo is a bad character. It's just that ultimately this is common amongst the entirety of Far Cry 6's story, is that there are themes that they try to tackle, and there's sensitive subjects even more so that they try to go for, and I just think that they fumbled a lot of them, where you had a moment you could have delivered something truly, I thought, almost profound, but they never really quite nail it. A major reason for this is I think the way the story is rolled out. This is one of the rare examples where I think that a story could have benefited from being more linear. Instead, it's stretched out across 3 arcs throughout the open world, which means, as I said at the top, your revolving door of characters. This is something I always hit on Ubisoft for. They just can't help themselves. They need to make these open world epics that stretch out for dozens and dozens of hours, when it's like, hey, imagine if you condense this, created like 5 to 7 compelling characters, develop them a lot, and gave us a real story. Instead, you get these flyby characters entering and exiting the story as quickly as they came. It's just never enough time for me to actually care. And so some of the themes that are behind these characters that they're trying to push onto the player feel forced, and it starts to feel very amateur. One thing that's cool that Ubisoft has been experimenting with, we saw this in Watch Dogs Legion, was choice, and there's choice again in this game, and I really like that. Far Cry's always dabble with it ever so lightly, and I like how they do it, because it's never this trying to make it an RPG, kind of like what we're seeing with Assassin's Creed nowadays. I like that Far Cry touches on it a little bit in a way that works but doesn't really break the design of the story. Overall, throughout the story, I had less complaints. There are good moments peppered throughout, but I just thought that they never really hit their stride. It's very inconsistent in pacing. There's a lot of cringe in there. I just gotta be honest, I hate to use that word. It's very overused and watered down on the internet. Speaking of watered down, here we are talking about a Ubisoft game, but for real, like, it's just the best way to describe some of the moments in this game, and it sucks because at its heart, there could have been something here, and that's what makes it frustrating. Next to that, you have side stories, which are called yarn stories. These are effectively the game's side quests. I liked some of these. They provided just variety and fun things to do, and it was really whenever I detached from the story and just said, screw this, I'm going off on my own, that I would find the most fun. Also, if you're like me, you probably couldn't stand the way Far Cry would tell its stories, which was that they would always have the camera in a first-person perspective, whereas in Far Cry 6, you'll see the camera is in third person, so you can actually see your protagonist interacting with all these characters. There's a connection established there, but more than anything, it's because I did not like, in these Far Cry games, the monologuing that would constantly happen, where you'd see the characters come up and grab clearly the camera in the mocap studio and start like moving around with it. It sounds like a nitpick, and honestly, it kind of is, but it consistently snapped me out of my experience. You're not even interacting or talking. You can tell it's just a cameraman standing there. Like, you're not behaving like someone standing there. And it just was so consistently awkward. I cannot explain my relief when I saw third-person cutscenes, because it's so much better in its delivery now. But I said that the gameplay was really what made me have the most fun. Let's dive into that. When it works, it can be a decent time, albeit extremely familiar. As I said at the top, this game is really in desperate need of patching. Next to Dark Alliance, this was probably the buggiest experience I had in 2021. In a way, it's actually an odd compliment, because unlike Dark Alliance, I did find the occasional fun here in my adventures. As I said, quests did not finish. AI was dumber than a bag of rocks. Rooms would just randomly set on fire that caused my quest objective to go down and not allow me to progress, making me reload. The list continues on and on and on over 25 hours. But more frustrating than that to me was the constant monster closets of enemies. They would just continue to spawn as you'd hunt down objectives in these areas. Unlike other Ubisoft games where they're like, here's a waypoint, go get it. They often sent you to radiuses and said, hunt it down yourself. Here's a visual clue of something you need to look for, and you bring up a picture on your phone. I like that. That's much better design, because it actually involves me in the open world more and not has me constantly looking at my map. But when you're doing that and you take out a camp of enemies and then you walk away and then you come back to that same area and they've respawned again and again and again, it gets mind-numbing. It's so frustrating how this was clearly overlooked. This game at times flat out does not work. And this bothers me because there are some changes under the hood that I think are pretty positive for the series. Beyond my little gripe with first-person cutscenes, here are some more that I think you can relate to, such as them ditching skills. So Far Cry always felt this need to have a skill tree again since Far Cry 3. And so I'm happy to say that in this game, they've actually ditched that and went for a new system, trying to, reinvent itself a little bit. It may seem a bit familiar though, because it kind of reminds me of Assassin's Creed now. That's just it. That's Ubisoft games, right? If it's not in one place, it's in another. So now you have this thing called a gear system, and gear sets will provide various buffs and bonuses when you equip items, such as carrying more munitions, bonus ADS damage, and when you complete said sets, you get an ultimate buff, if you will. There's also the workshop. This is probably my favorite part of the game that I think was mishandled. So you can change your ammo type. This means you have soft round bullets, you have armor-piercing bullets, incendiary bullets, you also have poison bullets. There's so many different ways to approach it. There's also blast rounds. And so what differentiates all these ammo types is the enemies you'll encounter. Some are armored, some are not. Some are in vehicles, where the blast rounds are great for vehicles. The armor-piercing rounds are great for, you guessed it, armored enemies. And then the not armored ones, you can use soft round bullets. So what happens is I was actually going in and tinkering with my loadout a lot more often than I really ever had in Far Cry. And I was thinking about and preparing myself more for my missions. But what happens is you can just kind of swap out your stuff on the fly eventually through the arsenal menu when you press pause. So you have access to everything. So if you didn't have something you needed, it's good it's there, because it would be frustrating if it weren't. But it sort of starts to dilute what I think is a really good idea on like a survival level, which Far Cry subtly touches on. What kind of sucks though is the enemies also have ammo types. And so that's where the gear set plays in. It's like, okay, I'm going to wear armor that's good against armor-piercing ammo. Or you could say, I'm going into an area with a lot of poison, I'm going to put on a poison mask now, so my character does not gradually lose health. There is a level of consideration there, but when the guns start going and bullets are flying everywhere, there's no real way to just check, like, okay, that enemy's got those rounds on them. And sometimes you'll just instantly die, and you're like, well, what happened there? Why did I die so quick compared to a previous encounter? And this can be exacerbated by the level gating in this game. So there's no skills, but there's still ranking up. And there's a degree of rubber banding so that you can't just go off to certain areas of the game until they want you to, which is pretty common in open world design. But given that there aren't any skills, the leveling up and progression just sort of seems out of place here. And what ultimately happens is when you combine the wrong armor set with the wrong ammo type coming your way, then you're out leveled, because a mission that was saying you were level 9 to go into it, you're fighting level 11s. You get rinsed more times than you really should. And it leads to a small bit of frustration because you know why things are happening, but there's only a certain amount of ways you can properly prepare for it. However, what's good about this is a lot of these unlocks happen through the open world activities. So you're going to go fishing, you're going to blow stuff up or kill some enemy bases. You can do the Los Bandidos operations, which should be familiar to a lot of you who have done any of these sort of missions while you're completing a mission objectives in Far Cry or Assassin's Creed games. There's cockfighting, so it's a fighting game within it, which I thought was one of the more fun surprises to find in Far Cry 6. You can get amigos, which are basically pets or buddies. You've seen them in past Far Cry games, your allies. In this game, you can get like an alligator to help you out, which is sick. And then you get materials and build said facilities. So there is a sound loop here, and I think that's why Ubisoft likes to apply this to all of their games, because it works, right? And game design is tough, and trying new things is a little bit scary and risky, and I understand that, but it's so goddamn familiar. Another thing they did change up though is Supremos. So these are backpacks that, again, you can attach mods to if you'd like. But more than anything, what's cool about them is the abilities they have. So I had one that could function as a double jump, but it could also allow me to scorch the earth around me. There were also ones that you could load up rockets into and sort of go full Boba Fett, lean over and just shoot a rocket out of the backpack and blow up an enemy vehicle above you. And so it gave me a little bit more diversity in my gameplay and was unique to Far Cry 6. So I thought this was a pretty good addition. It looks a little funky in cutscenes when everyone else is just chilling out and you're walking around with this huge hulking thing on your back, no problem. And the good news is everything I just mentioned, if it sounds great to you, is you can do this in co-op, and it made it a little bit more tolerable. What's unfortunate, though, is it's the same leader partner system. So let's say you are joining my game and we make progress through a particular arc. It's my progress that gets saved, not yours, just mine. And I think that's so annoying because it's like, why would I play with someone then? Why would I do that when I go back to my own open world and everything is the exact same? It just feels so borderline pointless, especially in a world where like co-op is so needed and it's so popular. I wish that they just had it where it was synchronized progression, or you could start up a co-op campaign lobby, something along those lines. But unfortunately, it does not progress together if you have not completed set objectives. And I found that to be, again, a real bummer. This is something we have seen in past Far Cry games. It is rearing its head again. So it's time for my verdict. This is how I really looked at Far Cry 6. Last year, I reviewed Watch Dogs Legion, and I called it a diamond in the rough. Ultimately, it was, again, a very familiar experience, but what I really appreciated about Watch Dogs Legion was it pitched this really new idea of playing as anybody and building your army, and you'd see them doing things in the open world that you just couldn't anticipate, and it felt like something so much more dense. What the game did was presented a new idea that I could believe in and see iterated upon. Unfortunately, I could see that idea being taken and put into Far Cry. It's going to get put into Assassin's Creed, and eventually it's going to be an idea that I look at like a lot of Ubisoft's original ideas and go, nice, and eventually start to bemoan it. But in the case of Far Cry 6, it's so familiar, and when it's not familiar, it's broken in my experience. I did talk to other reviewers. I did ask them about their experience. Granted, I didn't talk to every single one, so as always, I encourage you, please watch others' reviews. Do not let mine be the sole determining factor on whether or not you purchase a game, because you should take in multiple opinions. But people were not having as broken of an experience as I was, so this could be isolated. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to report my experience with the game. That doesn't mean I'm going to avoid that just because, well, so-and-so had a great time, so I'm going to say overall it's not a big deal. It's like, no, this was my experience. But the other way I was looking at it is that this was just consistently watering down their own games. And it was a breaking point for me. It's like, okay, I really enjoyed Valhalla, but it was time after that for something new. And as you continue to tinker away for 4 or 5 years on series and you come back with the same thing, stop being so safe. Do what you did with Watch Dogs, which, by the way, is probably your least successful series, and you're trying more new things with that than with Far Cry. I mean, the most new thing here that really shocked me was cockfighting. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. So at the end of the day, Far Cry 6, due to its very buggy state, it's not safe to buy right now. It's very familiar open world design and setup, and a story that fumbled its themes, unfortunately, where it didn't really go beyond, that was okay, leads to me saying this is a deep, deep sale that you would go for. If you see it for 15, 20 bucks, and you can get Far Cry 6 and play it co-op with a friend, and they don't care about the partner progress, you two are just going on your own together, then this might be a good purchase. But right now, I just feel like Ubisoft is at such a standstill, and I found myself frustrated playing the game. The bugs, the glitches, which I am known for being very tolerant of, really sent me over the top. Not only is this familiar, it's also practically broken in a lot of ways. So at the bare minimum, if you're going to take anything from this review, maybe not the price tag point, but wait for some patches. I think this game needs at least a couple. And of course, what happens, as we learned with Cyberpunk, is one patch might break a couple other things. So my suggestion, just monitor this one closely. That's all I've got to say on Far Cry 6. And certainly I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts in the comments down below. So do fire away. What do you think of Far Cry 6? Are you still picking it up? Let me know. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support all the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.